All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Good Pup's webinar on myth busting, positive reinforcement to the rescue. We are super excited to present this to you tonight. My name is Lisa Martin Garlick, and I'm the COO and co-founder here at Good Pup. As most of you know, Good Pup is a service that connects dog owners with certified dog positive reinforcement dog trainers via video chat. Our mission is to make quality science-based training affordable and accessible to all dog owners. And we were founded in 2017, and we've trained over 50,000 dogs. So you are in good hands. We launched our shelter initiative in 2020 with the goal to provide access to our training to all adopters, fosters, and community members within the shelter and rescue community to facilitate more successful dog adoptions and fosters and to really help all of the shelter and rescue missions, which are to keep dogs in the home. We launched this webinar series as a response to feedback we got that a lot of the stuff that we cover in Good Pup in terms of training and behavior will be super helpful for all members of the shelter community. And so we wanted to start a webinar series to cover some topics that will be super helpful for you, your teams, your shelter partners, your shelter staff, etc. And I will say that when you get these invites, I encourage all of you to forward it on to everybody within your shelter. We only have so many email addresses in our database, but if you get this and you're part of a shelter, we really encourage you to send it to all your adoption coordinators, counselors, anyone in the rescue community who might find this beneficial. I think I really want to make sure that you know that is highly important, and we thank you for that. To present today, we have Ms. Kate Hembry, who you all know. She's done our first two webinars. Kate has been with us as the head of training and behavior since the beginning. And before she joined us 4 years ago, she spent over 20 years working as both a certified veterinary technician and a professional dog consultant. So she's a CVT with a specialty in behavior and a Care and Prior graduate and an overall rock star. So we're super lucky to have her presenting for us tonight. So Kate, I will hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. I'm very excited to have everybody back again tonight. So welcome. And for anybody new, welcome as well. Couple of housekeeping. If you guys will hold your questions until the end, that would be great. We'll try to address those all then. For those of you who don't know, I live in the hills of the Appalachian, and sometimes my internet can be sketchy. So if you stop hearing sound, bear with me. It should come right back in a couple of seconds. And lastly, I've had a horrible cold all week, so I do have water with me, but if I start coughing, forgive me. May take a second to try to down some water and subside that cough. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive right into myth busting. I'm very excited about this webinar tonight. Positive reinforcement to the rescue. So to start with, I just want to go over our agenda that we'll be talking about tonight. We're going to talk about why do we want to know what is myth and what is not. We're going to talk a little bit about positive reinforcement, what that is, how it looks in the rescue, mostly because many of the myths we're going to talk about, which is the last part of our agenda, common myths, we will use positive reinforcement to debunk some of those myths a bit. So I want to make sure everybody's on the same page with that. So to start us off with, let's talk about why. Why is it important that we know, and Lisa's making me faster than I can possibly be, but that's okay. We want to talk about why it's important to know the truths when it comes to understanding dog myths, right? What's the point? Well, there's a couple of really good points. One is you guys are the leaders, and you are the leaders in the rescue community. So that means your adopters, staff, volunteers, the general public, they're looking up to you for answers and you guys for guidelines. And so it's really important, right, that you guys have all the most up-to-date knowledge and that you know about any potential misrepresentations that currently exist out there in the training environment, okay? Also, communication comes into play here. And for those of you guys who attended our last webinars on dog body language and communication, you know how important it is to be able to talk to our dogs. Well, it's just as important to be able to talk to people right? And if we're going to be able to communicate effectively, then again, we want to know what we need to say and how to say it and the information that goes along with that, right? And then lastly, because of the roles you guys play, you guys have an opportunity to really educate the masses, right? There's so many people adopting dogs from rescues all across the board. And if we were all on the same page, gosh, imagine all the things we can do. So I think it's super important that everybody is up to speed with what is a myth and what is a fact, right? And all of this ultimately is going to help us prevent problems in those homes when those dogs go to those adopted homes. And I think that's really important to note, because if we're already in front of potential problems, then we are increasing the likelihood that's going to be a permanent placement for that dog. And that's huge, right? That's really what we want. And I think the other big thing that I want to point out too about this webinar in general, it's not just knowing as we start to work through these myths that it is a myth, but also the facts that make it the myth, right? Because that's really going to help you guys communicate effectively as leaders and educate everybody. And that's my goal when we're done with our webinar tonight. So that's why it's important to know the myths, okay? And then now we're going to dive in a little bit to our positive reinforcement. So when we talk about positive reinforcement, I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with positive reinforcement. Probably many of you guys are using this currently in your rescue as well, which is terrific. But again, my goal tonight is to not sit here and focus a ton on positive reinforcement. I just want to touch on it enough so that everybody understands the concepts, because we're going to use those to, as I said, talk about some of these myths and explain why it is a myth. So we're going to talk about what it is briefly. We're going to talk about why we use positive reinforcement with our training, why we really want to be using it in our rescues, and how we want to apply it, okay, and specifically in the rescue environment. So let's start by talking about what it is. What is positive reinforcement when we think about that? So positive reinforcement, it is a methodology of learning. It is just a way to teach people, dogs, killer whales. It's a style of learning, okay? And it's just one part, one facet of learning theory. There's a whole different, I should say, there's a ton of different areas we could go down with learning theory. That could be an entire webinar in itself. But what I want you guys to understand is it is a part of learning theory. And from that part of learning theory, we have developed it to become a style of dog training. At least that's how we're going to use it. And a style of reward-based dog training, okay? So we're going to talk about what that looks like specifically here in the next slide. But reward-based dog training with positive reinforcement, what that looks like is that we are working on getting behaviors we want from dogs specifically. And in order to get those behaviors or increase the likelihood we're going to see those behaviors, we are reinforcing the dog with a consequence, generally a reward, a food reward that the dog likes. And as I said, that increases the likelihood that behavior is going to recur, okay? Now, the really cool thing about positive reinforcement training, and there's a bunch of different ways people refer to it, reward-based training, science-based training, force-free, pain-free training, but it allows us to very clearly communicate with our dogs by giving them a choice. We give them a choice, really, to perform the behavior that we're looking for or not. And we can actually motivate them to make that choice by the reward we're going to give them. And that's where it really gets unique. And we're going to talk about that a bit more. But what I want to point out here is that the dogs have a choice. And that's a very big part of positive reinforcement. They can get the reward if they want to do this, or they don't get the reward, okay? Now, one thing I want you guys to take away from positive reinforcement, okay? Again, it's a style of training. So we're going to look at this next slide that's going to show you guys essentially an equation I put together, because there's a lot of different parts of operant training, and this is one part. Remember, this is a part of learning theory. This is what I want you guys to leave here with, if nothing else. when we talk about positive reinforcement, this part of training, we are focused on the behavior. That's B, that's what we want, okay, the desired behavior. And positive reinforcement specifically means we are adding, so you guys see my addition symbol, a C, which is our consequence. So it's going to follow the behavior we want. And that consequence is something that is rewarding for the dog. So it's going to reinforce them for that behavior. And what that equals is that we increase, so you see my arrow there, it increases the likelihood of that behavior recurring. And that is why positive reinforcement is so effective, okay? That's what our goal is. So again, if nothing else, don't get caught up in all the various quadrants, as some people would define them with learning theory. This is just a section of it. And I want you guys, if nothing else, again, to remember this slide. B plus C equals an increase in the likelihood we're going to see it. Okay, that's what positive reinforcement is. Remember, consequence though, consequence following has to be a reinforcement, has to be something the dog finds rewarding. We'll talk about that more. Now, let's talk about why we want to be using positive reinforcement. Well, as I mentioned, it gives our dogs a choice, right? And yes, we can influence that choice. We can help motivate them to make the choice we want. But that's because they want the reward. And by doing so, this is a non-confrontational type of training, okay? So the decision-making of the dog, the choice of the dog is done without any use of force, without any coercion, okay? There's nothing threatening about it. And this is huge because this is going to help us build a bond of trust. Now, the other really cool thing about this is because the consequences that are following the behavior, reinforcements that our dogs like, which are generally rewards, are good. And we generally use food rewards. Food is good, at least it is for me. But the food rewards are good. Things surrounding that good, that food reward, also become good. That means our person becomes good. The owner practicing the training becomes good. The training itself becomes good. All of these things are creating a very positive connection for that dog involving training and learning, and that's what we want. The other reason we want to really use positive reinforcement is because, as I mentioned, it increases our desired behavior, right? And because it's increasing the likelihood that our desired behavior is going to recur, because the dog wants to do it. They're driven, they're motivated, they're getting paid what they want. It's going to naturally decrease the undesired behavior, the behaviors we don't want, right? Because they're not getting anything for those. We're not rewarding those. And so that's really important to note that we can actually influence in a very positive manner and really kind of mold our dogs in the direction that we want with the manners and obedience using positive reinforcement. Now, when we talk about any kind of positive reinforcement, right? What I want you guys to note here is that the dogs are making choices and they're working through problems. They're learning things in a very humane, non-confrontational, reward or good, positive manner, right? And what this is doing ultimately is it's helping build trust between the dog and the person. The dog can trust that they perform this behavior and they get their reward. And because the dog's trust is being built from that person, we also have a line of communication opening up, right? The owner and the dog are learning how to talk to each other. And that's huge because that's ultimately helping me create a relationship and strengthening the bond between the owner and the dog. And so we want this trust, we want this communication, we want this relationship, and we want this solid bond, right? Because this is going to help our dogs stay in those forever homes. Now, let's talk about why we want to use it for our rescues even more. Again, you guys just heard me say all of those things, right? Trust, communication, relationship. Those are all promoting that human-animal bond. We want that, right? What's the ultimate goal for our dogs being adopted and being rescued? For them to find a safe, loving environment where they can stay forever, right? And by promoting that human-animal bond from the get-go, we're helping that happen. The other thing I want you guys to keep in mind is because we are using everything in a positive manner with no force, no cohesion, we're alleviating any risk of fear and anxiety. And this is helping us solidify the relationship for the long term. And that's key, right? And the other thing that's really important that we want to take into account for our rescues is if we're training with positive reinforcement, our dogs are learning already in the environment and leaving with the likelihood of that behavior we've taught them in our rescue going into the home because they've been rewarded for it in the past. And that's going to increase their adaptability. They're already walking out the door with some manners and some knowledge, and that's huge. And our end result of all of this is going to be, again, as I said earlier, that permanent placement. So I really want to encourage everyone to explore, if you aren't already, the philosophy of positive reinforcement and using it within your rescues. Now you might ask, how are we going to do that? We're super busy. We have so many dogs. We have so few staff. We have so few time. I get it. I've actually been there. That's where I got my start years ago, and I understand it. So I want to just go over a couple of quick ideas that I think you guys can use to help easily implement some of the positive reinforcement training that we're talking about as far as how to get it started in your rescues. So first and foremost, and we already brought this up, education, right? You can educate your staff and your volunteers on how to use it, what it is, how it helps, right? You can start training from the ground up with people coming in. So that's huge. Another option, weekly training classes, right? These can be offered. Volunteers could attend the classes. Staff could attend the classes. You can do these classes now virtually in your rescues with Good Pup, right? So the resources are limitless for you guys. Also, when we talk about dogs in the shelter environment, training treats, having those available to your staff and your volunteers. Very simple concept, very big deal. Yes, I can picture some of you guys probably grimacing in certain environments where we don't want someone walking through an area with a lot of dogs with treats on them. But if you are working with a dog as an individual in an area and we don't have that risk, right? Making sure treats are available to our staff and volunteers can be huge. What about equipment? That's another big one. Making sure that the dogs have the appropriate equipment, they can be managed appropriately so that staff and volunteers can actually work with them and teach the dogs. That's something we can have donors do. We can fill out a list and have those purchased and bought and donated. Play groups. A lot of us don't think about this, but this is an easy one. I know many of you guys, we put the dogs out together, but matching the dogs to appropriate play groups based on the style of play, the intensity, the amount of energy, size is really appropriate in that setting because play itself is self-reinforcing. If the dog is having fun, it's reinforcing the play. And if I have set it up where the dog's play style is appropriate, I'm actually promoting and teaching my dog how to play in a socially acceptable manner. And that's a really big one. Okay. Lastly, working to create some individual training plans. Again, I know many of you guys have a lot of dogs. I'm not suggesting all at once. Maybe you're doing some of these, maybe you're not doing any of them, but baby steps, working one thing very small at a time, whether it be just starting with some simple education, maybe some training treats to specific volunteers, right? Individual training plans can seem overwhelming. Maybe you just pick one or two dogs. Maybe you pick dogs that have more challenging behaviors, dogs that have been in your rescue longer. One of the really cool things that we're offering right now with Good Pup are scholarships. These can be pre-purchased and you guys can actually offer them, make them available to your fosters, even to your adopters. And it comes with meeting with one of our Good Pup trainers, but also an actual individual training plan put together by our behavior team, right? So that's a really unique way to use that and help promote it within the rescue and actually send people out the door with tools already, okay? All right, so we talked about positive reinforcement. Again, Behavior plus a consequence the dog likes equals an increase in the likelihood that that behavior is going to recur. That's what we want. Talked about a little bit about why we want to be using it, how to use it in the rescues. Now let's get to the fun part of tonight, and let's talk about our common myths. Although I would dare say, and I love this picture I put up here, but one of my best friends who is a huge unicorn fan would be very disheartened to see that I put this picture up here because she completely 100% believes in unicorns. But let's talk about some of our common myths. That's the fun part of this. And keep in mind, again, as we're talking through these myths, right? My goal is for you guys to not only know that the information, the myth itself is a myth, okay? It's not truthful, but why it isn't truthful. So myth busting number 1, dominance theory. I would imagine that most of you on some level have experienced conversations with staff, with volunteers, with owners that are talking about their dogs being dominant to them. The dog jumped on me, they're jumping on me all the time, they're trying to dominate me. My favorite one, I think, is my dog tried to beat me through the door, they're trying to be dominant, okay? So here's our myth. Dominance theory is still the way to train dogs. What do you guys think? I'm gonna actually ask the chat for you guys to put into chat. Do you think that this is fact, it's truth, or is it a myth? Let's see if I can get anybody to respond. I've got 1 myth. Let's see if anybody else jumps in. 2 myths. Oh, good. I'm liking this conversation. 3 myths. Yes, this is a myth. Okay. The challenge I think we run into is that, unfortunately, the general public doesn't necessarily know that. And this is where it comes in, that importance of you guys as leaders in the rescue organization. Somebody said, Ben said, yes, I think that's a harmful myth. Yes, it is. It can be very harmful, right? And that's why you guys as leaders in rescues, right? It's important you guys know this so that you guys can communicate and educate and get people up to speed with where things are now with training. So first of all, when we talk about dominance in itself, dominance is a characteristic trait, okay? It's not an actual term that we want to use to describe dogs. When we talk about it with dogs, we are talking about a social relationship between 2 or more dogs. So specifically, when we're talking about dominance, we want to define it as a relationship between individual animals that is established by force, aggression, and submission to determine who has priority access to multiple resources. That's our definition. We'll talk about that more, okay? That definition was actually written by the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior. So these are veterinarians that have specialized in animal behavior. This is what they do. These are the gurus of behavior, and that's their definition. Now, dominance theory itself. Let's talk about it. Where did it come from? Well, over 30 years ago, it came from a study off of wolves done by a wildlife biologist named Dr. David Mack. The study itself was very unique, okay? It was one of the first research information we had really to go off of for dogs and for training. And we ran with it, okay? The problem is that this theory, this study was done almost 40 years ago now. And this theory itself, written by Dr. David Mack, has been debunked by Dr. David Mack. I didn't want to include it in here because I didn't want to take up too much time because we have a lot to go through, but I'm going to put in chat an actual YouTube, let me see if I can get it to click through, an actual YouTube link. Okay, this is an interview with Dr. Mack about his theory and why he finds it no longer valid, at least when it comes to training of dogs. Okay, but essentially the theory itself has been debunked. There's a lot of holes in it. One of the biggest holes, one is, gosh, yes, it's based on wolves, which yes, are the ancestors of dogs, but how many thousands of years are between wolves and dogs? And secondly, We have so much more information and up-to-date research now with dogs, really more focused on feral dogs, which would be a much more accurate representation as far as how dogs interact with each other. So if dominance theory is debunked, then that also means some of the training behind that came off of that philosophy should not be used. We'll talk about that more. But back to our definition of what dominance is. Remember, it is defined as a relationship between individual animals. Okay, so again, it's not a characteristic. It's not my dog is dominant. It's a relationship, generally between two dogs. Okay. The other thing that's really important about that is that that relationship is generally based on what's happening in the environment and resources in that environment. Okay, so food, water, space, but it's between several dogs and it's based on a resource. So it's not about jumping on the person, right? It's generally about a toy or food. And when it comes to that person, this relationship that is based over resources about individual animals is between a dog and a dog. It is not between a human and a dog. We are not dogs, and dogs know that. And dogs are not humans, and we know that, right? So we want to treat them like dogs, and we want to be the humans. So very important things to keep in mind when we talk about that. The other thing that I want to bring up, and this comes into our training part when we talk about the dominance, right? We talked about this relationship that's established by force, aggression, and submission. I have to have one and I have to have the other, okay? When I have these two, what we normally see happen is that rarely, if ever, is actual force used because one parts of that relationship defer, they submit to the other. And that's very important to note, right? So they're not using force to get the resource. It's really just a communication between two dogs. And that's what we want to talk about. And when we talk about a lot of training techniques that are based off of dominance theory, it's using force. And so that's really an inaccurate representation. And then lastly, what I want to leave you guys with here is that when we do use some of the concepts of dominance theory, as far as needing to be the alpha, needing to be in charge, rolling my dog onto their back, getting in their face, growling at them, biting them back. If in these scenarios, what our dogs are thinking is that we're scary and we're upsetting them and we're concerning them. And maybe they fight back because they go into fight mode because they're freaked out. Maybe they just try to get away because they're scared of us. Whatever ultimately happens, we are perceived as a threat in the dog's mind, and that's the last thing we want, right? We want to build a bond. We want to strengthen that with our dogs, and that is the goal. So ultimately, our goal, if you guys look at our next slide, what we want with our dogs, we want to be using non-confrontational, humane training methodologies that result in that communication we were talking about and strengthen that human-animal bond, which puts our dogs in those forever homes forever, right? And we want to be educating our staff and our volunteers and our adopters about that. And I know, because I still work with people regularly, even in Good Pup and in my own practice as well, this seems to be a constant discussion I have with people. So I want you guys to have the appropriate information behind this myth so you can talk about it with people and why we don't want to be using strategies with training that implement dominance theory. This last slide, just so you guys have it available, and remember everybody attending and some I know who aren't attending, but we'll get the recording. Take a screenshot of this, but this will be in the recording. These are online resources that you can print off and make available to staff, to volunteers, to anyone you would like, to help provide education on the debunking of dominance theory and hopefully get everybody on the same page in that right path. Okay, Myth busting number 1 is done. Let's go to number 2. Dogs are stubborn. So the actual myth is dogs that don't listen are stubborn. I would again ask for some chat responses here. I'm interested to see who thinks this is a fact and who thinks this is a myth. I'm going to give you guys just a second. I do this, so I can wake everybody up, right? Yes, good. I love seeing that everybody is on the same page. Myth. This is a myth. Yes. So when we talk about dominance being a characteristic, right, that we put on our dogs, so is stubborn. It is a human characteristic trait that we are using to describe our dogs. And dogs are not stubborn generally, and I see some of these coming through the chat, which is great. There's a reason behind it. So let's talk about this, okay? Somebody said, and they're right on spot with this, that it's more possibly fear related. So when I have a dog who is not listening, I need to break down the situation. And one of the first things I want to think about is, do I have an emotion-based concern, which could be fear, anxiety, maybe it's frustration, maybe it's over arousal. But do I have an emotion-based concern? And the reason I want to look at that is because, remember, our emotions, those responses, they're under cognitive control, okay? They're autonomic, they're activated. And when that happens, even the most well-trained animal is going to not be able to respond, okay? When you're in that frame of mind, fear, anxiety, right? Learning is inhibited. And so we need to look at the situation that's happening around our dog. Do we have emotions happening that are inhibiting learning, that are in the way? Because I won't be able to teach my dog what I would like them to learn. I won't be able to get them to respond to what I'm asking them to respond to unless I address the emotion first. So that's the first thing we want to look at. Other things we want to take into account when we're looking at dogs and people say they're stubborn. Every dog is an individual, just like us. Some of them will learn faster, some of them will learn slower, some will pick up certain things faster than others. That is all very normal, okay? As a trainer, I also want to look at my communication. Does the dog understand my cue? Do they know what the cue means? Is my timing off? When should I be delivering the treat, right? These are things I want to take into account. Are there too many distractions happening around my dog? Are they not able to focus, right? Just like a 5-year-old child in Disneyland, listening becomes harder with distractions. What about my motivator? Something else I need to take into account. Do I have something that's motivating my dog to actually respond with a behavior in that setting? Maybe they're not interested in what I'm offering as the reward. All things to consider. And lastly, capability of the dog. We do have dogs of various ages. They don't even have to be an elderly dog, right? But we can have dogs with hip dysplasia that may not easily be able to sit. So we want to take into account, do we have any physical limitations that we also need to take into account as far as why our dog is not listening. So the dog may not be responding, but it is not because he is stubborn. So a lot of information there. Hope you guys walked away with some good knowledge about the whys behind that, because I know I run into that one and everybody says, well, of course they are. Why aren't they? So I want you guys to have those ideas to help figure out why that dog isn't being stubborn so you can explain it. Now, myth busting number 3, training puppies. You can't train a puppy until they are at least 6 months old. All right, I'm going to go ahead and answer this one for you guys. This is a myth, okay? And I'm going to tell you guys how this myth got started, right? So you know the why behind it. So let's look at a couple of things with puppies. When we talk about puppies, just like with babies, when do they start learning? From birth. The minute they're born, right? The minute they are capable to observe or relate in any way to their environment, just like our human babies. If you guys think about it, how many puppies are already house trained at 3 months? 12 weeks, 12 to 14 weeks. At least most of the puppies I know are. Again, they're all individuals, right? But yeah, somebody said I start when they come to the home. Yeah, I start training from the minute they come into the home, because if I can house train a puppy at 3 months, I can sure be teaching them cues. And actually what research shows us is that most puppies are capable of learning cues as early as 7 or 8 weeks. And that's huge, right? One of the reasons this myth got started, and this is what I want you guys to know, is what did we used to use? We used to base all of our training, most of it really, years ago, with dogs at least, on dominance. And dominance training works a whole lot off of punishment-based techniques, aversive techniques, things that are unpleasant or harmful. Well, if I've got a young puppy and I want to make sure they're not harmed or hurt, I'm going to let them get a little physically bigger before I start to apply those techniques. There's something kind of wrong with that, don't you think, right? I'm not going to train this dog until they're older because my techniques might physically harm them. Just throwing that out there as far as something to be said for aversive techniques. But because we are promoting positive reinforcement techniques, right? And that's what we want to be using, whether we're doing, you guys are working with Good Pup, you're working with other trainers, making sure you have that positive reinforcement person, right, to help, and educating those owners on that. Everything should be fun. It should be about the dog's choice. It should be building that bond. We don't have to worry about any physical concerns with harm. Therefore, we can do it right away. Now, puppies are going to have a shorter attention time frame. Any of us who've worked with puppies, we know that, right? So you might have to have frequent sessions that are really short. But they are still very capable of learning. In fact, one of the biggest things we want to promote with puppies is socialization, right? So socialization, this is a time frame of learning for dogs, associative learning. Again, it could be an entirely another webinar. I'm not going to get into it. What I want you guys to know is this time frame is very specific, between 8 and 14 weeks. 8 and 14 weeks. So we definitely want to be having our puppies out, socializing them, which is exposing them to novelties, to new people, to new places, to smells, to sounds, sights, everything. All right, so we can definitely start training our puppies from the get-go. Now, next one, on the other end, training adults. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. I'm going to go ahead and stomp on this for you guys. This is a myth. Yes, Jill, 100% right? My mother's 72 years old. She did not grow up using computers. She now spends her days talking to her grandchildren through FaceTime on her iPad. You can learn, any old dog can learn new tricks. It's very feasible, right? So when we talk about old dogs, there are a couple of things we want to take into consideration when we are training with them. One is time. It may take us a bit more time to connect the dots for our dogs. And part of that can also be because, especially if we're trying to replace a behavior remove a behavior we don't want and teach them one that we would like them to do instead. If they've been rehearsing that behavior for a while, well, that can mean it's going to take us more time to kind of remove it because it's become part of the norm for the dog. But the really nice thing about our older dogs is they tend to be a lot calmer and therefore are a lot more focused, which makes training very much enjoyable most of the time. But you can absolutely teach older dogs new tricks. All right, let's move on to our next myth busting, number 5. I'm sure some of you guys have seen this. Training with treats, right? If I train with treats, my dog will only listen when I have treats. I'm going to actually ask you guys in chat. I want to know how many of you guys have had owners, adopters, people you've worked with as far as training. How many people have told you this? Raise your hand, say me. I just want to get a general idea. Because I think I get this all the time. Several. Yep. Everybody keeps coming with me's. Several. Yes. And somebody said you need to phase them out. Yes. So here's the thing about treats. If you train with treats, will your dog only listen when you have them? No, it's a myth. But there are some things we need to talk about so that we make sure it's done correctly, because you can run into problems with treats. You can really run into a problem with any reward that the dog finds reinforcing, okay? But let's talk about treats. For one, We use treats a lot with training because they're super easy for a reward. The majority of dogs love food, right? So they're a great motivator to use. And because the dog is motivated, right, they're going to learn faster. So that's one of the reasons we use treats a lot, and one of the reasons we want to be using treats. That being said, we do have a variety of situations or owners who are concerned about treats. There are other rewards available that we can also train with. Remember, behavior plus the consequence. Consequence has to be something the dog finds rewarding. It doesn't have to be a treat, guys. It can be a variety of things. It can be pets. It can be praise. It could be a game of play. It could be a toy. It could be a life rewards. And we can get off on a whole nother tangent on different types of rewards. But my point is, if we don't want to just do the treats, we can use other rewards. Sometimes you have to get a little more creative, but you can use other rewards, okay? And when I say sometimes you have to get a little more creative, hold that thought, and I'll tell you why. So when we run into problems with treats, and really any reward, is when our order isn't correct, right? So we've talked about we have to have that behavior with positive reinforcement, the behavior we want. We've talked about how we then, after we have the behavior, add our consequence or our reinforcement. If I don't have that treat after the behavior, if that treat is in front of the behavior or my timing is off, there is the potential for my reward to become part of the signal, part of the training for the dog. And what I'm specifically referring to, and this is where I said hold that thought, is when we use treats to lure behaviors or help manipulate the situation with the dog following the treat that results in our dog performing the behavior we want, okay? Again, this is about food, so they're being motivated to perform that behavior. We're using it to help ourselves, right? But when I use that treat to help get that behavior and I don't correctly fade it once I have the behavior, so that it's only coming after the behavior, then that is when I run into problems. And that is when I have dogs responding only for a sit that includes a treat in the hand, because we have not properly faded the lure that helped us teach the behavior to begin with, okay? So it comes down to that order, right? Again, we want to have the behavior followed by the consequence. And if we're using treats in front of the behavior to help us, then as soon as our dog is offering us the behavior, we want to slowly remove the treat out of the picture and get it on a cue. All right, myth busting number 6, potty training. I'm sure many of you guys still run into this. Rubbing a dog's nose in a potty accident will help them learn not to eliminate in the home. This is a myth, guys. My dad would disagree. My dad, who's also 72. But rubbing a dog's nose in a potty accident does not actually help them learn to not eliminate in the home. Let's talk about the why behind this. Oh, I love that. Somebody else agreed, their dad too. But I do think a lot of people still believe this. I run into it even in puppy classes today. So knowing the why behind it's really important, right? Because then you guys can say, well, this is why you shouldn't do it. So for starters, I want you guys to think about if you had a friend over to the house and they brought a friend with them and that friend spoke Spanish. They don't speak English. It could be any language, but they don't speak your language, right? And you walked over to your pile of laundry with them and you kind of shoved their face in it. Do they know what you're trying to tell them? Do they know if your laundry's clean, if you want it folded, if you're just showing them the laundry pile, or maybe they just think you're really rude? But my point is that they don't speak English and neither do dogs, okay? Your dog or your puppies do not speak English. Yes, somebody said not to bop them on the nose with the newspaper either. Yes, same idea. They don't understand what it is you're trying to tell them. My 8-week-old puppy does not know the difference between my carpet and the grass outside. I have to teach them that. For a dog, it really comes down to just a physiological need. The bladder is full and they need to release it. There's pressure. They feel the pressure, they release it. So it's a physiological need. It is not about them feeling guilty or shameful, right? It is just about them needing to go to the bathroom, right? So they don't speak our English and they have a physiological need. The other issue we run into, and this is really big, and this is one I like to point out when I have people arguing about this, is timing. When you are training, if I want to connect the reward, the consequence to the behavior, I want the dog to understand that performing that behavior is what got them this. It needs to happen a half a second to 1 second after the behavior has happened. The same goes for punishment. If I'm going to punish a behavior and I want the dog to connect the dots, it has to happen a half a second to 1 second after it's happened. So unless you are actually standing there when the dog uses the bathroom and they are just finishing, it is not effective to come back hours later or whenever you discover the accident, which is generally what happens, right? And rub their nose in it. There's absolutely no connection. And if anything, now this dog is worried about you and worried about what you do around urine. And this is just making you scarier as a person and really ultimately breaking down that human-animal bond. And that's what we don't want to have happen. So I really like to point that timing out to people. That's a big one. It helps them we have studies out there that show that's how learning theory works, whether it's a person, a dog, again, killer whale, tiger. And so once they know that, it seems to kind of help make that connection with them. All right, myth busting number 7, food manners. This might be my favorite myth. Messing with my dog's food while they eat will teach them not to guard their food from me. All right, I'm giving you guys this one. You guys tell me, is this a fact or is this a myth? Yikes. Yikes is right, Lindsay. Yes, good, good. I'm getting tons of myths. This is 100% a myth. But this was based off of our dominance theory years ago, right? We have to be the alpha. We have to be in charge. We have to show them they can't do this, okay? So what I want you guys to know is the reasonings behind the why, so you can tell people about this, right? So when it comes to food, let's think about this. Again, I have my friend over with their new Spanish associate. We're sitting at the table. We're having a meal. He's sitting right beside me. We've just served these nice, big, wonderful plates of lasagna. And I reach over, grab it. I grab the lasagna and take it right off his plate. That is just rude and socially unacceptable. Why would I expect my dogs to deal with that, right? So what we want to talk to people about, what we want to educate them about is, one, dogs, they're natural guarders. It is natural for them to want to keep their resources, okay? And a lot of people don't recognize that. Now, do we want them growling about it? No, but we can certainly do a lot to change that. One, prevention, okay? So we can prevent it with our young dogs. Instead of teaching our dogs to be worried I'm gonna come up and stick my hand in the plate, I could instead teach my dog, hey, when I come up and I'm next to you, good things happen. So I could stand by them while they're eating and drop treats. I could walk past them and throw treats at them around their bowl. It doesn't have to get in the bowl. It just needs to be near them. All I'm teaching my dog is that when I come near you, good things happen. And that's what I want to have happen, okay? I do want to caution you guys though. This is specifically with our young dogs, our puppies. If I have an adult dog with a history of guarding concerns, those are dogs that we want to be building some formal plans with, reaching out to professional, having them come see us at Good Pup so we can help walk them through it. That's where we've got rehearsals of behaviors and we want to approach things differently. The last thing I want to do is be giving anyone this advice and creating a bigger problem. So we just want to use it as a prevention with dogs that don't have that history of guarding. And ultimately, let's just let our dogs eat in peace. I know I want to eat in peace, which is impossible with 3 children, but it is what I want every night. Okay, moving on, because I don't know how it got to 7:50, but it is. Myth busting number 8, the growl. If my dog growls at me, then I should punish them for it. It's a knee-jerk reaction. We don't like growls as people. We don't want growls, but yes, this is a myth, and we absolutely do not want to punish them for it. Let's talk about why. Why don't we want to punish them for it? Well, for starters, it's a signal. They're dogs, we're humans, okay? This is them yelling at us, hey, alert, alert, I'm really upset about this, okay? We want that signal. When I don't have that signal, then my signals are going to escalate. So if I punish this signal and the dog's like, oh, well, that didn't work, I need to tell them a little bit more. I need to be a little bit more serious about how upset I am. It escalates. And for those of you in our body language webinars, right, you know, we start with that stress, we move to arousal, and then we're quickly into aggression, right? We move right up that ladder of aggression. So if these are the dogs where if I punish the signal for growl, but I haven't addressed the underlying reason for the growl, the dog's going to escalate their signals. They're going to intensify, and I'm going to quickly end up with a dog who doesn't growl anymore because that didn't work. They're just going to go straight to the bite. And that's the last thing we want. And that's what can happen. What we want to have happen instead is that when we have a growl, we back up, we say, oh, all right, that check engine light's on. I need to take you down to the mechanic. We need to see what's going on here, right? So we want to just take a minute. Let's reassess the situation and let's see if we can figure out why our dog is growling. What do we need to do to try to help change their concern so that we remove that growl, okay? This next slide, again, screenshot it or it'll be available to you guys because I think we run into this a lot with growls. I mean, people just instinctively don't want their dogs growling. Great resources here that you can print off, hand out, staff, volunteers, any owners taking dogs as well about why we don't want to punish that growl. All right, myth busting number 9, looks can be deceiving. My dog knows he did something wrong because he looks guilty. Yes, thank you about the check engine metaphor. Very interesting study done years ago. This is a myth, you guys. The next slide shows you guys the actual research that was done on this that disproves this. So let's think about guilty, dominant, stubborn, guilty. This is a human characteristic, okay, that we put on our dogs. There was actually a study done by Dr. Alexandra Horowitz. She's a diplomat in the American College of Veterinary Behavior. So she's a veterinarian who specialized in behavior. This was the study, and you guys can read about it. She had different owners come in with their dogs. She had owner and a dog, one at a time, one group at a time, come into a room where they had just filled a plate with fresh meat sandwich. I don't know exactly what was on it, but there was food on the plate, right? And the dog was allowed to walk by and sniff it. They wanted the dog to know it's there. Then they asked the owner to leave the room. And then when they came back, what they did was study the dog's body language when the owner was upset because the food wasn't there. And what they saw from the dog was a lot of appeasement signals. So if you guys remember, if you attended the body language ones, appeasement signals are those that affect what the dog is concerned about. They affect the stimulus, right? Generally, they get the stimulus to go away. So we have cowering, or maybe we have averted gazes, or we have kind of hiding, slinking body language away. Tails might be slightly tucked, right? Interesting thing though, in this study, none of the dogs actually ate the food. The food was removed by the testers, unbeknownst to the owners. So the dog's body languages in this study was only a response to the actual owners. So read up on it when you guys get a second. But again, this is us putting things on our dogs. Myth busting number 10. My dog potties in the house out of spite from being mad at me for leaving. Had this discussion today earlier with Miss Lisa, who's on the call. This is a myth. And I get this a lot. In fact, I got into a discussion with my veterinarian friend. She's a veterinarian. And she argued with me about this. So here's the thing. Dogs have the brains of like a 2 to 3 year old, guys. They cannot actually rationally think through, my mom left me, so I'm going to go pee on her bed or her shoes. It's just not feasible. Okay. What is feasible is that my dog is stressed because they're alone, and dogs are social creatures. That's why we have them in our lives. That's why they're part of our family. Because of that stress, my dog may alleviate themselves, because elimination actually helps my dog calm down. The elimination itself has pheromones in it that are calming for them. And guess what? If my dog's more comfortable near my stuff that smells like me, that's part of me, makes them feel closer to me, well, that's the closest thing they can get to me. So they're near me, my stuff, to help calm themselves down, and then they alleviate themselves to help calm themselves down, right? So this is really about stress when we have elimination, not about spite. Now, you can also have a couple other things on here, and I've bounced around, so forgive me on the slide, but a couple other things we need to rule out. We can have medical conditions when we see this happening. So first and foremost, these dogs need to be checked by veterinarians. Stress, as we just talked about, can play a factor, but not spite. Time frame, maybe we just really left our dogs for too long, or maybe they didn't fully void that bladder before we left because we're busy and we weren't paying attention. Or maybe they're just not 100% house trained. Maybe they don't know the difference 100% between grandma's house and our house. Okay, so all things we want to take into account when we're talking about our myth busting. All right, myth busting number 11. Playing tug of war will result in my dog becoming aggressive. I'm sure a lot of us over the years have heard this. I know this is actually one that I had to disprove to myself, right? This is a myth. Tug of war is actually a great tool and a great game for our dogs to learn. So it's a great way to teach mouth manners. You can have a long line, mouth comes near me, we stop playing. If I can teach my dog, drop it, take it, it actually helps teach impulse control. They can play growl when they play this game, but dogs can play growl in other scenarios. That doesn't necessarily mean it is going to transfer to other areas, and it doesn't mean they're aggressive. And this is actually a great type of reinforcement. In fact, in many sports competitors, track and search, or I should say tracking, searching, variety of working dogs, right? This is the type of reinforcement they use because they can't use treats in those settings. So they're reinforcing those behaviors that we want with the tug of war game. My Fosters tug of war with each other. That's great. I mean, as long as, again, the dogs understand the give and take, they can tug, right? I think it's really just about having that, making sure, Mary, that we don't have an over-arousal happen, because that's when I run into problems, right? So same with like a play with over-arousal. You would just want to have a limited time frame on the tug. All right, I know Lisa's pushing me to wrap up. This is our last one, myth busting, number 12. Using a pinch collar is an effective way to solve a dog's leash reactivity. Yes, this is 100% a myth. So we talked about earlier with our different reinforcements, right? Talked about how dominance theory doesn't work. Well, aversive training using collars like this came out of the dominance theory, right? We have to be alpha, we have to be in charge, we have to manhandle our dogs. But the reality is, right, that a pinch collar doesn't help me be a better trainer, and it doesn't help my dog learn either. So some of the big problems with pinch collars, one, they are unpleasant, they are uncomfortable, and they are painful, okay? And they can actually physically harm our dogs, and that's something we want to take into account. The other thing is, if I have a dog showing reactive behavior on the leash, there is always an underlying emotion, some kind of stress involved. And while my pinch collar may inhibit the behavior, just like punishing the growl inhibits the signal, it does not address my underlying stress. So now I'm walking around with my dog in a constant state of stress. Well, that's certainly not what I want. And worst case, maybe they go into learned helplessness. Maybe they completely shut down because they're completely defeated and powerless, and they learn to hate walks and hate being outside. And the other problem we run into is that dogs don't necessarily associate the sensation of the pinch, the feel of the pain, with the collar. That pinch, that pain that happens, that split instant, can be connected to anything in that dog's line of sight. The squirrel, the person they thought was nice last week that won't be nice next week, the small dog that they liked last week that they won't like next week. And that's really our biggest fear, is that we're going to cause more problems by using a pinch collar. So, all right, again, to recap, myth busting with positive reinforcement. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. You guys are the leaders of the rescue world. Get out there. You've got the information. You've got a lot of the whys now, the knowledge behind these myths. I know a lot of you guys knew these were myths. I hope I gave you some factual information about why they're myths so that you can educate everybody and do that with that effective communication because you've got the knowledge now, and ultimately prevent problems from starting, which is going to help with that long-term placement with your rescues. Thank you guys. I really enjoyed the lecture, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again soon. Lisa,
Thank
I'll
you
turn
so
it
much,
back to you.
Kate. I loved that one, especially because I don't know about everyone on this call, but I constantly hear people say that. And when I'm in the moment, some of these myths, I forget how to argue back. So these gave me a lot of really great tools to be able to give great reasons as to why these myths are untrue. So I loved this one. I hope you all did as well. It sounds like you did, which is great. Just a reminder that if you are in this call and you don't already partner with Good Pup, you can always reach out to Allie Mayer on this call. We also distribute the webinars now through our new website. So you can always go to goodpup.com/shelters, or you can reach out to Dexter Calder and he will be able to point you in the right direction. And if you have any other feedback about what you'd like to see in these webinars, we are doing them monthly. So please let us know. We love doing them. We love providing this resource, and we would love to hear from you. So thank you so very much and have a great night.